The old stagecoach kicked up clouds of dust as it rolled into Pine Ridge, Colorado. Eleanor Whitman pressed her face against the small window, watching the mountains rise up around the tiny town like giant stone walls. Her stomach twisted with worry. This place would either save her life or destroy what was left of it. Eleanor stepped down from the coach, her legs shaky after 3 days of travel. The wooden platform creaked under her worn boots. She carried one small leather bag. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it. At 24 years old, she had nothing left back east. Her father's gambling debts had taken their house, their furniture, even her mother's wedding dress. The debt collectors had made it clear: pay up or face much worse than losing a home. The mail-order bride arrangement had seemed like her only choice. Thomas Garrett, a shopkeeper in Pine Ridge, needed a wife. Eleanor needed safety and a roof over her head. They had exchanged 3 letters. His handwriting was neat and proper. He promised a comfortable life as the wife of a respected businessman. What more could a desperate woman ask for? The townspeople on the dusty main street stopped what they were doing to stare at her. Word traveled fast in small places. They knew another Eastern woman had come looking for a husband. Some whispered behind their hands. Others just watched with curious eyes. Eleanor kept her head up and walked toward Garrett's general store, even though she felt like running back to the stagecoach. The store sat right in the middle of town, with big windows and fresh paint. A wooden sign hung above the door. Garrett's General Store, fair prices, quality goods. Eleanor smoothed down her travel dress and pushed open the door. A bell jingled overhead. Inside, shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Canned goods, tools, fabric, and household items filled every space. The smell of coffee beans and leather goods mixed together. It should have felt welcoming, but something made Eleanor's skin crawl. "You must be Eleanor." The voice came from behind the counter. Thomas Garrett looked exactly like his photograph. Medium height, brown hair parted neatly, clean-shaven face. He wore a pressed white shirt and dark vest. Everything about him seemed proper and correct. "Yes, sir. I'm pleased to meet you in person." Eleanor forced a smile and walked toward him. Thomas studied her from head to toe like he was examining goods for purchase. His eyes lingered too long in places that made her uncomfortable. "You'll do nicely," he said finally. "We'll be married Saturday. That gives you 3 days to learn how I like things done around here." Before Eleanor could respond, an old man with gray hair shuffled toward the counter, carrying a heavy sack of flour. His back was bent and he moved slowly. The man set the sack down with obvious effort. "Mr. Garrett," the old man wheezed, "this flour sack has a hole in it. The trail of white powder behind me proves it. Could I please exchange it for one that's not damaged?" Thomas's whole manner changed in an instant. His polite smile disappeared. "Henry, you old fool. You probably put that hole there yourself with your clumsy hands. I'm not running a charity here. You bought it, you keep it." Eleanor watched in shock as Thomas grabbed the torn sack and shoved it back toward the elderly man. "Next time, be more careful with my merchandise." Poor Henry's face turned red with embarrassment. Other customers in the store pretended not to notice, but Eleanor saw their uncomfortable expressions. The old man struggled to pick up the damaged sack and shuffled out the door, flour still leaking behind him. "Some people think they can take advantage of my good nature," Thomas said to Eleanor, his pleasant smile returning as if nothing had happened. "You have to show them who's in charge or they'll walk all over you." Eleanor's heart sank, but she tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe Henry really had damaged the flour himself. But then a young boy, maybe 8 years old, accidentally bumped into a display of canned peaches while chasing his rolling hoop. 3 cans tumbled to the floor with loud clanks. "You little brat," Thomas shouted, startling everyone in the store. "Look what you've done to my display." He grabbed the boy roughly by the arm. "Where's your mother?" "She's going to pay for any dents in those cans." The child started crying. "I'm sorry, mister. I didn't mean to. My hoop got away from me." Eleanor couldn't stay quiet. "Please, it was just an accident. The boy didn't mean any harm." Thomas turned cold eyes on her. "My future wife needs to learn when to speak and when to keep quiet. Children must be taught respect or they grow up to be worthless." The boy's mother rushed over and quickly paid for the undamaged cans, apologizing over and over. She hurried her son out of the store while he was still sniffling. Eleanor felt sick watching the whole scene. "Now then," Thomas said, straightening his vest, "let me show you where you'll be staying until our wedding." He led her toward the back of the store, where a narrow staircase led to the living quarters above. The rooms upstairs were clean but cold. Everything was arranged perfectly like a museum display. Thomas showed her to a small room with a single bed. "You'll sleep here. I don't believe in unmarried people sharing quarters, even when they're engaged. After Saturday, you'll move into the larger bedroom with me." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She needed time to think, to figure out what she had gotten herself into. That evening, Thomas took her to dinner at the town's only restaurant. He ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. He talked mostly about his business, his important position in the community, and his expectations for a wife. Eleanor was to keep house, help in the store when needed, and above all, never embarrass him in front of the townspeople. "A man's reputation is everything in a place like this," he said, cutting his steak with sharp, precise movements. "My wife's behavior reflects on me. I won't tolerate any woman making me look foolish." Eleanor picked at her food, her appetite gone. The meal felt more like a business meeting than a romantic dinner. Thomas never asked about her interests, her dreams, or even how she felt about leaving everything behind to come west. She was just another acquisition for his well-ordered life. Walking back to the store after dinner, they passed the saloon. Loud voices and piano music spilled out into the street. A few rough-looking men sat on the porch, drinking and talking. One of them called out, "Evening, Garrett. That your new mail-order bride?" "Mind your own business, Pete," Thomas snapped. But as they walked away, he gripped Eleanor's arm tightly. "Stay away from places like that. And stay away from men like those. A respectable woman doesn't associate with the wrong sort of people." Eleanor winced at his tight grip but said nothing. She was starting to understand that Thomas Garrett's respectability was more about appearance than actual goodness. That night, lying in the narrow bed in her small room, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had done. The walls felt like they were closing in around her. She had escaped one trap only to walk straight into another. But what choice did she have? She had no money for a return ticket east, no family or friends to help her, no skills that could earn her a living wage. Through her small window, she could see the dark mountains surrounding the town. Somewhere out there in the wilderness, she had heard whispers about a man who lived alone, shunned by the community. People crossed themselves when they mentioned him, calling him dangerous and unpredictable. They said he wore chains as punishment for some terrible crime. Eleanor had always been good at reading people. Her father's gambling had taught her to spot lies and hidden motives. The skill had kept her safe more than once when his debts brought dangerous men to their door. Now that same instinct was screaming warnings about Thomas Garrett. His politeness was a mask hiding something cruel underneath. But what could she do? She was trapped just like that mysterious mountain man in his chains. The only difference was that her prison had clean sheets and regular meals. For now, that would have to be enough. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, hoping that maybe Thomas would show his better side in the days to come. Deep down, though, she already knew the truth. She had traded her freedom for security, and the price was going to be higher than she ever imagined. In 3 days, she would become Mrs. Thomas Garrett, and then there would be no escape at all. The mountain wind howled outside her window, carrying with it the promise of winter. Eleanor pulled her thin blanket closer and tried not to think about how cold her life was about to become. The first week as Thomas Garrett's promised wife opened Eleanor's eyes to the man's true nature. What she had seen in the store was just the beginning. Behind closed doors, Thomas dropped all pretense of being a gentleman. Every morning, he gave Eleanor a list of tasks written in his precise handwriting. Clean the store shelves in exact order. Arrange the merchandise with labels facing forward. Count the money in the cash box twice to make sure she hadn't made mistakes. If anything was out of place, even by an inch, Thomas would point it out with cold disapproval. "A proper wife pays attention to details," he would say, making her redo the work until it met his impossible standards. "Sloppy housekeeping leads to sloppy thinking, and I won't have either in my establishment." Eleanor tried her best to please him, hoping things would improve after their wedding. But Thomas seemed to enjoy finding fault with everything she did. When she folded his shirts, the creases weren't straight enough. When she swept the store, she missed dust in corners he checked with a white cloth. When she served him meals, the food was too hot or too cold or not seasoned right. The breaking point came on Thursday evening. Eleanor had spent all day cleaning the upstairs living quarters until they sparkled. She was proud of her work and hoped Thomas might finally offer a kind word. Instead, he found a water spot on one window and flew into a rage. "This is exactly the kind of careless work I expected from someone with your background," he snarled. "Your father was a failure and a drunk, and you're showing the same weak character." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "My father had problems, but he wasn't a bad man. And I've worked hard all week to please you." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Thomas's hand struck her cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. Eleanor stumbled backward, touching her burning face in shock. "Don't you dare raise your voice to me," Thomas said quietly, which was somehow more frightening than shouting. "And don't ever defend that worthless gambler you called a father. You're lucky I'm willing to give you a respectable name despite your family's shame." Eleanor stared at him with tears in her eyes, finally seeing him clearly. The polite shopkeeper was gone, replaced by a cold, cruel man who thought he owned her. She realized this was just the beginning. After their wedding, there would be no witnesses to his treatment, no neighbors close enough to hear if she called for help. That night, Eleanor lay awake nursing her sore cheek and making plans. She had to get out of Pine Ridge before Saturday's wedding, but she had no money and nowhere to go. The stagecoach wouldn't return for 2 weeks, and even if it came tomorrow, she couldn't afford a ticket. Friday morning brought no improvement in Thomas's mood. He criticized her breakfast, complained about how she arranged his newspapers, and made cutting remarks about her appearance. Eleanor felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, unable to escape his constant scrutiny. "I'm going for a walk," she announced after lunch, desperate to get away from his suffocating presence. "Where?" Thomas demanded immediately. "Just around town. I need some fresh air. Be back in 1 hour. And stay away from the saloon and those rough characters who hang around there. I won't have my future wife gossiping with the wrong sort of people." Eleanor nodded and hurried out before he could change his mind. The autumn air felt like freedom after being trapped indoors with Thomas all week. She walked quickly through town, nodding politely to the few people who acknowledged her. Most folks seemed friendly enough, but she noticed how they watched her with curious eyes. In a place this small, everyone knew everyone else's business. At the edge of town, a dirt path led up into the foothills. Eleanor had noticed it from her bedroom window but hadn't explored it yet. Something drew her toward the mountains. Maybe the promise of solitude, or maybe just the need to see what lay beyond Pine Ridge's narrow streets. The path was steeper than it looked from town. Eleanor's city shoes weren't made for climbing, but she pressed on anyway. The higher she climbed, the better she felt. Up here, she could breathe freely without Thomas watching her every move. After 20 minutes of walking, Eleanor heard the sound of metal striking stone in a steady rhythm. She followed the sound around a bend in the path and stopped in surprise. There, working a small mining claim beside a clear stream, was the most unexpected sight she had ever seen. A tall man with dark hair swung a pickaxe with practiced skill, breaking up rocks to search for precious metals. But what made Eleanor catch her breath wasn't his work. It was the iron shackles around his ankles. Heavy chains connected his feet, limiting his movement to short steps. This had to be the dangerous mountain man the townspeople whispered about. Eleanor knew she should turn around immediately and hurry back to town. Everything she had been told suggested this man was violent and unpredictable. But as she watched from behind a large boulder, she saw something that made her question those warnings. A small rabbit had gotten its leg caught in a wire snare set by some hunter. The animal was struggling frantically, injuring itself worse with each panicked movement. The chained man noticed the rabbit's distress and immediately set down his tools. "Easy there, little one," he said in a gentle voice that carried clearly in the mountain air. "Let me help you." Eleanor watched in amazement as the dangerous criminal carefully approached the terrified rabbit. His movements were slow and non-threatening, despite the chains that forced him to take awkward steps. He spoke to the animal in soothing tones while working to free its trapped leg. "I know you're scared," he continued, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he manipulated the wire. "But fighting will only make it worse. Sometimes the best thing to do is stay still and let someone help." The rabbit seemed to understand his calm energy and stopped struggling. Within minutes, the man had freed the animal and was examining its injured leg. Eleanor saw him tear a strip of cloth from his own shirt to bind the small wound. "There you go," he said, setting the rabbit down carefully. "That should heal up fine if you don't run too hard on it for a few days." The rabbit hobbled a few steps, tested its bandaged leg, then bounded away into the underbrush. The man watched it go with a satisfied smile, then returned to his work as if nothing unusual had happened. Eleanor found herself stepping out from behind the boulder before she could think better of it. The sound of her approach made the man look up, and she saw his expression change from surprise to wariness. Up close, she could see that his face was weathered by outdoor work but not cruel. His eyes held sadness and loneliness rather than the violence she had been warned about. "Ma'am," he said carefully, taking a step back, "you shouldn't be up here. This isn't a safe place for a lady." "Are you telling me to leave because you're dangerous?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Or because other people have told you that you are?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He studied her face for a long moment, and Eleanor got the feeling he was trying to read her intentions just as carefully as she was reading his. "My name is Eleanor Whitman," she said when he didn't answer. "I'm staying in town temporarily." "I know who you are," he replied quietly. "Word travels fast around here. You're the mail-order bride who came for Thomas Garrett?" Eleanor winced at the description. "That's what people are calling me, yes." "Then you definitely shouldn't be talking to me, miss. Garrett won't like it, and neither will the town. I'm not the sort of company a respectable woman should keep." "What did you do?" Eleanor asked directly. "Why are you chained like that?" The man's face hardened. "Depends on who you ask. The sheriff says I stole mining equipment from a claim down the valley. The man who accused me is the sheriff's brother-in-law, and he wanted my land for himself. The evidence against me was thin, but in a town where reputation is everything, thin evidence is enough." Eleanor studied his face as he spoke. Her father's gambling problems had taught her to spot liars, and this man's words rang true. More importantly, his actions with the injured rabbit showed a character that didn't match the violent criminal the town believed him to be. "Do you have a name?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "Jack Coleman. And you really should get back to town, Miss Whitman. Your intended husband has a nasty temper, and being seen with me won't help your situation any." The fact that he was more concerned about her reputation than his own told Eleanor everything she needed to know about Jack Coleman's true nature. Here was a man who had been branded a criminal and shunned by society, yet he still tried to protect a stranger from gossip and trouble. "How do you know about Thomas's temper?" Eleanor asked. Jack's expression darkened. "Like I said, word travels fast in small towns, especially when it concerns a man with Garrett standing in the community." Eleanor realized that her bruised cheek from yesterday was probably visible if you knew what to look for. The thought that this stranger had shown more concern for her welfare in 5 minutes than Thomas had shown all week made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. "I should go," she said reluctantly, glancing at the sun's position. "But thank you for the warning about my situation. It's good to know that someone notices these things." "Miss Whitman," Jack called as she turned to leave. "If you ever need help, real help, my cabin is just up this path another quarter mile. I may not be much use to anyone." Against every rule of proper behavior, Eleanor found herself returning to the mountain path the next afternoon. She told herself she was just taking walks for her health, but deep down she knew the truth. Jack Coleman's kindness had touched something in her heart that had been frozen by Thomas's cruelty. This time she brought a basket with extra food from the store's kitchen. Not stolen. She had paid for everything with her own small savings. Bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of honey disappeared from her meal portions throughout the week. Thomas never noticed. He was too busy finding fault with other things to pay attention to exactly how much food she ate. Jack was working his claim again when she arrived, the steady ring of his pickaxe echoing off the canyon walls. The sound stopped when he saw her approaching. Eleanor noticed how he automatically stepped back, putting distance between them. The chains around his ankles clinked with each careful movement. "Miss Whitman," he said formally, "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "I brought some food," Eleanor said, holding up the basket. "I thought you might be hungry." Jack stared at the basket like she was offering him gold instead of simple bread and cheese. "That's very kind, but I can't accept charity. People will talk if they find out you've been bringing food to the mountain." "Let them talk," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "Besides, it's not charity. I was hoping you might teach me something about mining in exchange." That was a lie, but it gave them both a way to make the food exchange seem like a fair trade instead of pity. Jack seemed to understand what she was doing and nodded slowly. "Well, I suppose I could show you how to pan for gold in the stream," he said. "But you'll ruin that nice dress if you try it." Eleanor looked down at her best blue dress, one of only two she owned. It's just a dress. It can be washed. They spent the afternoon by the clear mountain stream. Jack showed Eleanor how to scoop gravel into a shallow pan and swirl it with water, letting the heavier material settle to the bottom while the lighter dirt washed away. It was harder work than it looked, and Eleanor's arms ached after just a few attempts. "You're trying too hard," Jack said, demonstrating the technique again. "Gold is heavy. It wants to sink to the bottom. Your job is just to help the lighter stuff float away. Let the water do most of the work." Eleanor tried again, this time with gentler movements. To her amazement, tiny flakes of yellow metal appeared in the bottom of her pan. "Is that real gold?" "Small pieces, but yes, real as sunrise." Jack smiled, the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from anyone since arriving in Pine Ridge. "You're a natural at this." They talked while they worked. Jack told her about his life before the accusation that changed everything. He had been a school teacher back east before coming west to try mining. He still loved books and learning, though few people in Pine Ridge knew about his education. "Why did you come out here?" Eleanor asked, sitting on a smooth rock to rest her aching arms. "Same reason most folks come west, I suppose. Looking for a fresh start, a chance to make something of myself. Thought I could save enough money from mining to buy some land, maybe start a small ranch." He gestured at his chains. "Didn't work out quite like I planned." Eleanor told him about her own journey, her father's gambling addiction, the mounting debts, the night she had to flee their boarding house ahead of dangerous men who wanted their money. Jack listened without judgment, something she wasn't used to from men. "Your father sounds like he had an illness," Jack said thoughtfully. "Gambling can take hold of a person like a fever. Doesn't make him evil, just sick." The understanding in his voice brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Thomas had called her father worthless and weak. Jack saw the same situation and found compassion instead of blame. As the sun started setting, Eleanor reluctantly gathered her things to return to town. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked. Jack hesitated. "I work the claim every day. But Miss Whitman, you need to be careful. Thomas Garrett isn't the kind of man who forgives easily. If he finds out you've been talking to me—" "I'll be careful," Eleanor promised, though she wasn't sure how she could avoid Thomas forever. The next morning, Thomas was in one of his black moods. A shipment of goods had arrived damaged, and he took his frustration out on Eleanor over breakfast. "This coffee is weak," he snapped, shoving the cup away so hard it sloshed onto the table. "And these eggs are overcooked. How am I supposed to run a business when I can't even get a decent meal at home?" Eleanor bit back the response that rose to her lips. She had made his coffee and eggs exactly the way he liked them every other morning. His anger had nothing to do with the food and everything to do with his need to control something when business didn't go his way. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, reaching for his cup. "Let me make fresh coffee." Thomas grabbed her wrist before she could take the cup. His fingers dug into her skin hard enough to leave marks. "Maybe the problem isn't the coffee. Maybe the problem is that you spend too much time wandering around town instead of focusing on your duties here." Eleanor's blood went cold. Had someone seen her going up the mountain path? "I only take short walks for fresh air. You said I could." "I said you could walk around town. That doesn't include hiking up into the foothills where God knows what kind of riffraff might be lurking." Thomas's grip tightened painfully. A decent woman doesn't go places where she might encounter dangerous men. "I haven't encountered anyone dangerous," Eleanor said truthfully. Jack Coleman was many things, but dangerous wasn't one of them. Thomas studied her face with cold, calculating eyes. "See that you don't. After we're married tomorrow, these little adventures of yours will stop completely. My wife will stay where she belongs, in this house, helping with my business and keeping her nose out of other people's affairs." He released her wrist with a push that made her stumble backward. Eleanor rubbed the red marks his fingers had left and realized with growing horror that this was her future. Thomas would never let her out of his sight once they were legally married. She would become a prisoner in her own home. That afternoon, Eleanor made what she knew might be her last trip up the mountain path. She had to warn Jack that Thomas was getting suspicious. More than that, she needed to see his kind face one more time before her world became completely dark. Jack was repairing a wooden sluice box when she arrived. He looked up with pleasure when he saw her, then frowned at her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. Eleanor told him about Thomas's suspicions and threats. Jack's face grew grim as he listened. When she finished, he sat down heavily on a tree stump and shook his head. I should never have let you come up here, he said. I knew it would cause trouble for you, but I was selfish. It's been so long since anyone treated me like a human being instead of a dangerous animal. You didn't let me do anything, Eleanor said firmly. I chose to come here because talking to you is the only good part of my day. They looked at each other across the small clearing, and Eleanor felt something shift in the air between them. Jack's eyes held warmth and understanding that she had never seen in Thomas's cold stare. More than that, she saw loneliness that matched her own. What's your plan after the wedding? Jack asked quietly. Eleanor had been trying not to think about that. Survive, I suppose. Hope that Thomas improves once we're married. Maybe have children who might soften his temper. And if he doesn't improve? The question hung in the mountain air like morning mist. Eleanor had no answer because the truth was too frightening to speak aloud. If Thomas didn't improve, she would spend the rest of her life walking on eggshells, trying to please a man who couldn't be pleased, raising children who would learn that love came with conditions and cruelty. I don't have choices, she said finally. Women like me don't get to pick our lives. We just try to make the best of whatever situation we land in. Jack stood up and walked to the edge of his claim, staring out at the valley below. His chains clinked with each step, reminding Eleanor that he knew something about being trapped by circumstances beyond his control. What if you did have a choice? He asked without turning around. What if there was another way? Like what? Run away into the wilderness and live like a hermit? I wouldn't last a week up here alone. Not alone, Jack said quietly. With someone who knows how to survive in these mountains. Someone who could teach you everything you need to know. Eleanor's heart started beating faster. Jack, what are you saying? He turned around then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I'm saying that maybe we don't have to be trapped by other people's choices. Maybe we could make our own. The idea was so shocking, so completely outside the bounds of proper behavior, that Eleanor couldn't find words to respond. Run away with a man she barely knew? A man the whole town believed was a criminal? It was madness. But as she looked at Jack's honest face and remembered Thomas's cruel hands, Eleanor realized that madness might be the sanest choice she had left. Before she could answer, the sound of voices drifted up the mountain path, male voices getting closer. Jack immediately moved toward Eleanor, his expression urgent. Hide behind those rocks, he whispered. Now! Eleanor ducked behind a large boulder just as 3 men came into view. She recognized Sheriff Watson and 2 of his deputies. Her heart pounded as she crouched in the shadows, afraid to breathe. Saturday morning dawned gray and cold, with clouds gathering around the mountain peaks like a warning. Eleanor woke before sunrise in her small room above the general store, knowing this was supposed to be her wedding day. Instead, it felt like the day she was going to die. The white dress hanging on her door had belonged to Thomas's first wife, who had died in childbirth 3 years earlier. Thomas had mentioned this fact without any emotion, like he was talking about a piece of used furniture he was recycling. The dress smelled of mothballs and old sadness. Eleanor sat on the edge of her narrow bed and tried to imagine putting on that dress, walking down the aisle of Pine Ridge's little church, and promising to love and obey Thomas Garrett for the rest of her life. The thought made her stomach turn over. Every instinct she had screamed that marrying Thomas would be the worst mistake of her life. But what choice did she have? She was alone in a strange town with no money and nowhere to go. Winter was coming to the mountains, and she couldn't survive alone in the wilderness. Running away meant almost certain death from cold or starvation, unless she wasn't alone. Jack Coleman's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. Maybe we don't have to be trapped by other people's choices. Maybe we could make our own. The idea was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Eleanor had never done anything truly shocking in her life. She had always been the good daughter, trying to hold her family together despite her father's gambling. She had followed society's rules even when those rules led her straight into Thomas's trap. But what if just once, she listened to her heart instead of society's expectations? A sharp knock on her door made Eleanor jump. Eleanor! Thomas's voice cut through the morning quiet like a knife. Get up and get dressed. The ceremony is at 10 o'clock and I won't have my bride looking like she just rolled out of bed. I'm awake, Eleanor called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Good. I'm going down to open the store. Be ready to leave for the church in 2 hours. His footsteps moved away from her door and down the stairs. Eleanor looked around the small room that had been her prison for the past week. Her few belongings were already packed in the same leather satchel she had arrived with. She had never really unpacked, as if some part of her always knew she wouldn't be staying long. She thought about Jack up on his mountain claim, probably packing his own belongings after the sheriff's ultimatum. In a few days he would be gone forever, driven away by the same kind of cruelty that was about to trap her in marriage to Thomas. Eleanor made her decision. She dressed quickly in her traveling clothes instead of the wedding dress. The brown wool dress was practical and warm, better for mountain travel than white silk and lace. She braided her hair simply and pinned it up under her plain hat. In the mirror, she looked like what she was about to become, a woman choosing her own path instead of the one others had chosen for her. Eleanor picked up her satchel and crept down the stairs. Thomas was in the store already, arranging merchandise and humming tunelessly. The sound made her skin crawl. How could he be so cheerful about a day that filled her with dread? The back door of the store led to an alley that would take her out of town without being seen from the main street. Eleanor slipped through it like a ghost, her heart pounding so loud she was sure the whole town could hear it. The path up to Jack's claim had never seemed so long. Eleanor's city shoes slipped on loose rocks, and her breath came in short puffs in the thin mountain air. But she pushed on, driven by determination and the growing certainty that she was finally doing something right. Jack was loading supplies into a worn canvas pack when Eleanor burst into his camp. He looked up in surprise, taking in her traveling clothes and flushed face. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be getting ready for your wedding?" "I can't marry him," Eleanor said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I can't spend my life with a man who hits me and treats me like property. I know it's crazy and I know you barely know me, but yesterday you said maybe we could make our own choices." Jack stood very still, his hands frozen on the pack straps. "Eleanor, do you understand what you're saying? If you don't marry Garrett, you'll have nothing. No home, no money, no protection. I'll have my freedom," Eleanor said firmly. "And maybe I'll have you if you meant what you said about not having to be alone." Jack searched her face, looking for doubt or second thoughts. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, letting him see the determination there. "Marrying me would make you an outcast," Jack said quietly. "The whole town thinks I'm a criminal. You'd be giving up any chance of respectability or acceptance." "I've seen what passes for respectability in this town," Eleanor replied. "Thomas Garrett is considered a pillar of the community, but he's cruel and controlling. You're labeled a criminal, but you're the kindest man I've ever met. I'd rather be an outcast with you than respectable with him." Jack set down his pack and walked toward her slowly, his chains clinking with each step. When he reached her, he gently touched her cheek where Thomas had slapped her days earlier. The bruise had faded, but the memory remained. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Garrett will never forgive you, and neither will the town." Eleanor covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses from honest work. "I'm sure. Will you have me, Jack Coleman? Will you make me your wife and take me away from here?" Jack's answer was to pull her into his arms and kiss her with a tenderness that Thomas had never shown. Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks, tears of relief and joy and hope for the first time in months. "We'll have to leave today," Jack said when they broke apart. "As soon as Garrett realizes you're gone, he'll come looking with the sheriff. They'll use your disappearance as an excuse to arrest me for kidnapping." "I'm ready," Eleanor said, shouldering her satchel. "I don't have much to pack." They were married an hour later beside the mountain stream where Jack had taught Eleanor to pan for gold. There was no preacher, no church, no witnesses except the wind in the pines and the clear water flowing over smooth stones. Jack had saved enough money from his mining to buy a simple gold band from his supplies, and Eleanor gave him the silver locket that had been her mother's, the only valuable thing she owned. "Do you, Eleanor Whitman, take this man to be your husband, for better or worse, in poverty and prosperity, in sickness and health until death parts you?" Jack asked solemnly. "I do," Eleanor said, meaning it with her whole heart. "Do you, Jack Coleman, take this woman to be your wife, to protect and cherish her, to be faithful only to her until death parts you?" "I do," Jack replied, slipping the gold band onto Eleanor's finger. They sealed their vows with a kiss that tasted of freedom and wild mountain air. Eleanor had never felt more certain of anything in her life. This rough man with chains around his ankles was worth more than all of Pine Ridge's respectable citizens combined. "Now we run," Jack said practically, shouldering his heavy pack. I know places in these mountains where no one will find us, at least until spring. We can build a cabin, start over somewhere else. They were 3 miles up the mountain trail when they heard voices shouting in the distance. Eleanor looked back and saw smoke rising from Pine Ridge. Someone had lit the church bell tower to call the whole town together. By now, Thomas would have discovered her absence. The hunt would begin soon. "Don't look back," Jack said gently, taking her hand. "That life is over now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Eleanor squeezed his fingers and turned her face toward the high peaks ahead. Behind them lay everything society said she should want: security, respectability, a comfortable home. Ahead lay uncertainty, hardship, and a future she would have to build with her own hands. She had never been happier in her life. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Eleanor thought about the scene that must be unfolding in Pine Ridge. Thomas would be furious, humiliated in front of the whole town when his bride failed to appear at the church. The sheriff would organize a search party, more out of spite than justice. The townspeople would gossip and shake their heads, calling Eleanor a foolish woman who had thrown away her chance at a good life. But Eleanor knew the truth. She hadn't thrown away a good life. She had escaped a terrible one. And in choosing Jack Coleman over Thomas Garrett, she had chosen love over fear, kindness over cruelty, freedom over security. The path ahead was steep and uncertain, but she would walk it with a man who treated her like a partner instead of property, a man who had shown her more genuine care in a week than Thomas had managed in their entire engagement. As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, Eleanor and Jack made camp in a hidden valley beside a crystal-clear lake. They built a small fire and shared simple food, talking quietly about their plans for the future. Jack knew of places deeper in the mountains where they could build a cabin and start a new life far from Pine Ridge's corruption. "Are you sorry?" Jack asked as they watched stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you regret giving up the comfortable life Garrett could have provided?" Eleanor looked at her new husband's honest face in the firelight and felt her heart overflow with certainty. "The only thing I regret is waiting so long to find the courage to choose my own happiness." That night, as they slept under the vast mountain sky, 5 years had passed since Eleanor shocked Pine Ridge by choosing the chained mountain man over the respectable shopkeeper. 5 years of hardship, struggle, and the kind of happiness she had never dared to dream possible. The first winter had tested them in ways Eleanor couldn't have imagined. Jack's hidden cabin in the deep mountains was little more than a one-room shelter with a stone fireplace and gaps between the logs that let in wind and snow. They had enough supplies to last until spring, but just barely. Eleanor learned to cook over an open fire, to mend clothes by candlelight, and to stretch every bit of food until it lasted longer than seemed possible. Her soft city hands grew calloused from chopping wood, hauling water, and helping Jack work his new mining claim. The beautiful dresses she had brought from the east wore out and were replaced by practical wool and leather clothing more suited to mountain life. But every morning when Eleanor woke up in Jack's arms, she felt grateful for the choice that had brought her to this place. Even when the wind howled through the cabin walls and snow piled 6 feet deep outside their door, she was warmer and safer than she had ever been in Thomas Garrett's comfortable rooms above the general store. Jack was everything Thomas wasn't: patient when she made mistakes, encouraging when she felt overwhelmed, and endlessly gentle with his words and actions. When Eleanor burned their dinner or accidentally spilled precious supplies, Jack would just smile and say, "We'll figure it out together." When she cried from exhaustion or frustration, he held her close and reminded her how strong she was becoming. Most importantly, Jack treated her as an equal partner in their survival. He taught Eleanor to shoot and hunt, to identify edible plants, to read weather signs in the sky. He valued her opinions and listened to her ideas about improving their situation. After years of being told she was too weak and foolish to make her own decisions, Eleanor discovered she was actually quite capable when given the chance. Spring brought new challenges, but also new hope. Jack's mining claim in their hidden valley proved richer than his old one near Pine Ridge. By summer, they had enough gold dust saved to buy better supplies and materials for expanding their cabin. More importantly, they had learned to work together as a team. Eleanor started a small garden while Jack worked the claim. She traded vegetables and herbs with isolated homesteaders scattered throughout the mountains, slowly building a network of neighbors who didn't care about her scandalous past. These were people who valued hard work and honest dealing over social respectability. In their second year, Eleanor convinced Jack to let her help with a project that was close to her heart. Using some of their gold money, they built a small schoolhouse in their valley. Word spread among the scattered mountain families, and soon children were riding hours on horseback to attend Eleanor's classes 3 days a week. Teaching these eager young minds reminded Eleanor of dreams she had forgotten during the dark years with her father and the terrible week with Thomas. She had always loved learning and wanted to share that love with others. The mountain children were hungry for education, and Eleanor found deep satisfaction in watching them grow and discover new ideas. Jack supported her teaching completely, even though it meant less help with the mining and household work. He would often sit in the back of the schoolroom during lessons, learning alongside the children. Eleanor loved watching his face light up when she taught history or mathematics, or read aloud from the few precious books they owned. Their third year brought the vindication that Eleanor had never expected. A dying man's confession in Pine Ridge revealed the truth about Jack's false accusation. The sheriff's brother-in-law, consumed by guilt and fever, admitted on his deathbed that he had planted the stolen mining equipment on Jack's claim to frame him for theft. The news reached them through traveling traders who brought supplies to the mountain communities. Sheriff Watson had tried to suppress the confession, but too many people had heard it. The territory government ordered an investigation, and Watson was removed from office in disgrace. "You could go back now," Eleanor told Jack when they received the news. "Your name is cleared. People know you were innocent." Jack was quiet for a long time, looking out at the mountains that had become their home. "Do you want to go back to town life?" he asked finally. Eleanor thought about Pine Ridge with its narrow streets, gossiping neighbors, and rigid social rules. Then she looked around their expanded cabin with its warm fireplace, well-stocked shelves, and windows overlooking the most beautiful valley she had ever seen. "This is home," she said simply. "These mountains, this life we've built, our school, this is where I belong." Jack smiled and pulled her close. "I was hoping you'd say that. I never want to live anywhere that you couldn't be completely free to be yourself." By their fourth year, the Coleman name was known throughout the mountain region, not as criminals or outcasts, but as the couple who ran the finest school for 50 miles and could be counted on to help anyone in need. When families faced emergencies, they knew Jack and Eleanor would provide supplies, labor, or simply a safe place to stay until things improved. Eleanor had become something she never expected, a leader in their remote community. People sought her advice on everything from teaching their children to settling disputes with neighbors. Jack's mining expertise and Eleanor's education made them valuable resources for the scattered homesteaders trying to build new lives in the wilderness. The fifth spring brought news that made Eleanor laugh until tears ran down her cheeks. Thomas Garrett had lost his store due to debts and bad business decisions. His reputation for treating customers and employees badly had finally caught up with him. 3 different mail-order brides had fled Pine Ridge after discovering his true nature, and the story had spread far enough to damage his standing in the community. "He's working as a clerk in someone else's store now," the trader who brought the news reported with obvious relish. "Lives in a boarding house room and has to ask permission to take a day off." Amazing how quickly a man's fortune can change. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in Thomas's downfall, only pity for a man who had created his own misery through cruelty and pride. She was too happy with her own life to waste energy on resentment. That same spring brought an opportunity that would change their lives again. The territorial government, impressed by the success of Eleanor's mountain school, offered to fund a larger educational facility if the Colemans would move to the county seat and establish a proper academy. "Think of all the children we could help," Eleanor said excitedly as they discussed the offer. "We could build something that would serve the whole region." Jack was more cautious. "It would mean leaving our valley, our claim, everything we've built here, and we'd be living in a town again, dealing with politics and social expectations." They talked about it for weeks, weighing the benefits against the costs. Finally, Eleanor had an idea that satisfied both their dreams. "What if we don't choose?" she suggested. "What if we keep our home here but also establish the academy? We could spend part of each year in town and part in the mountains. The older students could even come here for special programs about mining, wilderness survival, and mountain ecology." It was an ambitious plan, but they had learned that ambitious plans were possible when 2 people worked together with trust and love. Jack used his mining knowledge to survey mineral resources for the territorial government, while Eleanor designed curricula that combined traditional academics with practical mountain skills. By the end of their 5th year, the Coleman Academy was the most respected educational institution in 3 counties. Students came from hundreds of miles away to study, with the former mail-order bride who had chosen love over security and the falsely accused miner who had turned his suffering into wisdom. Eleanor often stood on the porch of their mountain cabin in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the peaks and marveling at the journey that had brought her to this place. The scared, desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Pine Ridge felt like a different person entirely. She had gained so much more than she had given up. Instead of Thomas Garrett's comfortable prison, she had Jack's partnership and respect. Instead of a respectable but empty social position, she had meaningful work that touched dozens of lives. Instead of security bought with submission, she had freedom earned through courage and hard work. Jack joined her on the porch, wrapping his arms around her from behind. The chains that had once bound his ankles were long gone, melted down and forged into horseshoes for their horses. He was free in every way that mattered. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had stayed and married Garrett?" Jack asked, his chin resting on top of her head. Eleanor leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "No," she said honestly. "I don't waste time wondering about paths I didn't take. This is the life I chose, and it's better than anything I could have imagined." In the distance, they could see lights beginning to twinkle in the windows of the academy dormitories. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference in the world. Eleanor and Jack would face it all together, as they had faced everything for the past 5 years. Their love story had become legend in the mountain communities,